Welcome to the 5th interview of Season 4. It's incredible to think we are already on interview number 5. In this interview, I am joined by Ken MacDonald. Ken is a TPI Level 3 certified physical trainer and a top 50 golf fitness professional by Golf Digest. Ken currently coaches many elite players in Southern Florida with his gym, Lifetime Performance. We discuss golf and training recovery, mobility, injury prevention, and much more. If you're training hard, like I know you probably are, this episode will help you avoid injury and prolonged pain. If you are planning on watching the video, I apologize for the misalignment of audio and video. I experienced a few technical issues while recording this episode, which created the issue. Let's hop in. Ken, thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So I first want to ask a little bit about you and, how did you get into golf and what you do now?
Well, I'm 44. I've been doing it for quite a while now, but I didn't start out in the fitness business right away. I actually played professional golf for about 5 years. Upon graduating college, I graduated from the University of Richmond, played collegiate golf there, and then came down to South Florida, like everyone else, and turned pro and started playing mini tours and, got with some success, won a few times, but never good enough to really make it. Did Q school 5 times. And at that point, I think I had realized this is not going to work. I need something else. And I had been doing some personal training on the side, working at a PGA National Resort. And then that part of my life started to become more meaningful, let's say, because it did help me in my game when I started to work out. And I realized that it was something that I could be pretty good at from a knowledge standpoint, being that I knew golf well. I just needed to find some and build some knowledge in the fitness realm. So I went back to school, got my master's degree in human movement science, went through the whole TPI certifications all the way through level 3 and just continued to learn. I really liked the learning aspect of it and started working with more and more clients. Ended up running the fitness center as fitness director at PGA National in 2000, and I want to say that was around 2006. I did that for about 5 years and then opened up my own facility in 2011, where I'm currently now. We've grown. We started out small, about 1,000 square feet. Now we're up to about 2,300 and looking to grow even more. So it's something that I was fortunate to get into at the time that I did. And I just liked it a lot. And it kind of evolved into, me dedicating more of my life now to helping golfers get better, either through strength and conditioning work, obviously the corrective exercise, working with injuries, stuff like that. That's kind of where my background is.
Yeah.
And that brings us to today.
Yeah. So with professional golf, was there a single moment in your career where you really realized, you know what, I'm not going to be able to make it past the level I'm at?
Yeah, it was the last competitive round I had. I think I shot like 85, which I had never in my life shot. And at that point, it was completely mental barriers that I was working to get over. And I didn't enjoy traveling anymore. I didn't want to grind anymore. And I was really liking what I was getting into. So, and now I just play for fun and play with people I like to play with. And it's a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah. So in your time as being in the golf fitness world, what are some of the biggest things that's changed from when you started to now?
Well, I think an understanding of, number one, like what really needs to be assessed when you're doing an evaluation with someone. TPI really did a great job of kind of putting an umbrella over that. I'd been exposed to some quote unquote golf training prior to Titleist Performance Institute coming into play, but I kind of realized what we were looking at was really not what was happening within the body. So since then, and that was probably, I think I first got certified in 2005 or 2006 through Titleist, and it was eye-opening. It was like, okay, these are the areas of the body we need to be able to assess and look at. And then more importantly, this is the whole body swing connection. There's a reason physically why you swing the way you do. And so if we can identify those physical restrictions, we might be able to improve that and give yourself a better platform for which to play, or a better foundation, and then potentially make changes in your golf swing. But you have to do that while thinking about the physical component as well.
Right. So I first want to talk about recovery as one of the
Hmm.
main things we discussed today. And I guess we'll start with workout recovery before we get into golf recovery. So let's say you just did a workout, high intensity workout, whatever. What should someone be doing immediately after a workout to improve their recovery?
Well, I think when you're talking recovery too, it's important to determine what are we talking. Are we talking about like someone who's training a couple days a week? Are we talking about someone who's hitting it hard every day? If that makes sense, I guess
Hmm.
a good program, someone should be working out fairly hard about 3 to 4 days a week. That's kind of the sweet spot where you're going to have enough chance to recover. You're going to have some days off, and as you go progressively through the program you're in, your body will start to adapt to it. Um, you know, from a basic recovery standpoint, uh, I like guys to eat almost immediately or have some sort of protein shake in their body to help refuel, to build muscle mass, and also to help recovery. Um, they can do stretching, cool down type stuff at home. We do usually give them some corrective exercises that I like them to do daily that can aid in the recovery aspect of things. A lot of times, just getting the body moving and not be stagnant can help with blood flow, which can help healing and helps recovery ultimately. With golfers, we're never really in a case where the recovery component from the workout per se is a real issue. Um, the recovery from a cumulative effect can be a problem. When guys are out there pounding 200, 250 balls a day, and then they're coming to work out, and then they're going to go do the same thing over and over again every day. So managing that is important. I like to know what their practice days are, typically when their tournaments are, and then planning their workouts around that so we don't get in trouble with the recovery component of things. But it's tough with golf because there really is no off season. It's hard to plan and say like, okay, we're going to devote these next 12 weeks to very limited ball contact, very limited practice, and just focusing mostly on body and creating body changes. And that just doesn't happen. So we have to kind of modify things as we go based on how the person's feeling, how they're recovering. So it's not something that's kind of quickly definable. If guys like to do cold water immersion, hot showers, stuff like that, all that stuff can help. Red light therapy, but a lot of it is personal preference too, like what works for them. And there's not a huge amount of substantial data behind that. If you are looking at data strictly, then you're going to always be guided right back to sleep. Sleep is the number one best recovery tool there is. So making sure you're going to bed at the same time every night, making sure it's completely dark, you're not using a phone, not watching TV or so within an hour or half an hour of going to sleep. Trying to wake up at the same time every morning is critically important, not varying that. Making sure it's very cold. I don't know if I said that already, but the temperature in the room has a lot to do with how well you're going to sleep. So that's what I like to talk to them mostly about, because those are the things you can typically control.
Yeah. Do you recommend a certain number of hours of sleep?
Yeah, I would say everyone's kind of different, but the sweet spot for people is going to be mostly around 7 to 8 hours.
Okay.
If you get too much, the 9 to 10 hours, that can be problematic. Obviously, too little, the cumulative effect of too little sleep um, can be an issue too. So a lot of
Right.
guys have the whoop strap or the Aura ring. That I think that helps them stay accountable to some extent. I don't.
Yeah.
It's fairly accurate. It's not. I don't think it's incredibly accurate, um, but it's good for people who need that kind of like discipline or reminders that this is what I need to be doing.
Yeah. So for someone, let's say, a junior golfer, 16, 17, trying to make it as to high a level as possible, would you recommend something like a whoop strap?
I might. I think that's a good idea for sure. I think I usually tell people not to become dependent upon it, and don't look at it as like, well, my whoop says my strain is high today. I can't. I'm not going to work out, even though they might
Yeah.
feel really good, which happens a lot. It's just reminders to say, okay, over the course of maybe 2 or 3 days, I've been getting pretty beat up, and I feel it. Today's going to be a day off. I'm not going to do anything today. I might just go for a walk, stuff like that. I might just do some stretching. So I do think it can be helpful to those who tend to burn it out a little bit too much, who do too much.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit about golf not having an off season, which
Mm-hmm.
For most people, that's true, but depending on where you are in the country and what level you're playing, that may not be true. Do you recommend someone who's kind of in that middle area or even to where they do have an off season set aside time where they're not hitting as many golf balls on purpose and spend more time in the gym?
100%. And doing what I do for a living, I speak with a lot of parents who have a lot of kids your age, and especially down in South Florida, it's a year-round thing. They
Right.
just want to keep going, keep playing tournaments, keep hitting balls. I grew up in New Jersey. It's cold. I played golf maybe 5 months out of the year. I also played hockey. I played some other sports, and there was times I'd go months without touching a golf club. I was able to play at a high level, get a scholarship. It wasn't super important that I was doing it every day all the time.
Hmm.
So yes, even if they are down here, I do recommend them taking about 2 months off. Sometimes not even touching the club in that time, and just kind of refueling, not for the physical aspect of it, but also for the emotional and the burned out aspect. Some kids just
Right.
love to play though too. They just love to go.
Yeah.
So I do recommend taking that time off so they have a chance to work on their fitness, give their body a chance to, when you're swinging a golf club one direction over and over and over again, you start creating these adaptations to that. And some of
Right.
these imbalances can show up. And that's could be a precursor to injury, asymmetries. So the time off helps with that, or just playing another sport, doing something else, forced time off, they call it.
Yeah.
And from what the data says and what we see with tennis players and golfers, um, those that have spent, actually all athletes really, but those who have spent the most time playing multiple sports up until about, it's typically when they're turning around 13, 14, 15, that age where they start to specialize. But if they're in a multitude of sports up to that point, they have a better chance of playing high level golf or whatever sport they're in, up potentially into college and then maybe as a pro.
What factors play into that? Why is that the case?
Yeah. So I think they tend to do better because of the very reasons we said. Mostly is that it gives them some time off from the sport so the body can recover. It gives them a chance to refuel, to get passion for it again. But it helps with athleticism and training coordination and movement. I see a lot of golfers that come to the gym. They've only played golf, and then when I take them through kind of a coordination circuit, a movement circuit, and it's just kind of all over the place. There's not a lot of athleticism there. And those are the things that you kind of learn to. You also learn speed. When you play multiple sports, you're learning to move fast. You're learning to move implements fast and quickly. That can translate to better golf, faster club head speeds, stuff like that. So, you have this kind of window of opportunity when you're in this, 13 to 17 year range, and those windows kind of change a little bit, but to put on a lot of speed with movement and through different sports, and then ultimately through strength training, to keep that speed, to be able to increase power as you get older.
Yeah. So one of the things that people I've talked to, other golfers my age, that they really dislike about going to the gym and doing golf at the same time is the soreness from the gym impacting their play on the golf course. What are some things people can do to limit the soreness or not let it limit their performance?
I would say number one is be consistent. I think the biggest problem why some of these kids get sore is because they end up not using soreness as an excuse, but saying like, I don't want to be sore for this tournament this weekend when maybe they have a workout on Wednesday or Thursday. So they take that second day off. Maybe they came in Monday. And so
Yeah.
now you're getting to a period where you're only working out once a week. And because you got tournaments every week, because like we said, a lot of kids just keep playing and playing and playing. And now you're not giving your body a chance to adapt to the strain that you're putting it under for the reason of adaptation and growth and to get stronger. So you start going through this phase of like you're working out hard and then you're sore, but then you don't working out again for the next week. So consistency, I think, is really important. Making sure maybe you get a 2 to 3 week block where it's okay to be sore. Make sure you're consistent with the workouts. Get through the soreness aspect of it. And by the way, no workout should really make you so sore you can't play golf or function the next day. You should know you worked out the next day. That's a good barometer for it. Just because you're really sore doesn't mean the workout was good. In fact, if you're too sore to do anything, it wasn't good. It was too much. So starting at the right level from an intensity standpoint, and then giving yourself the opportunity to be consistent for at least a couple of weeks. That was going to give you more confidence to go ahead and hit balls and play tournaments and everything, and not worry about the gym aspect affecting your golf game.
Yeah. And how do you find that, perfect middle ground of, being effective in the gym but not being too sore? Kind of what's the science behind that?
Um, that comes a lot with the initial session, the evaluation, going through a good health history with the person, seeing if they have a training history. And then, the first session, we typically keep it 2 sets for everything. So it's not a lot of volume. It's not a lot of intensity. We keep the weights down. We make sure they can master body weight movements. And then we get feedback. How are you feeling? I'll text the next day. How are you feeling? Oh, I feel pretty good. I feel a little bit sore. Then you kind of know. If you get the response like, oh, I couldn't get off a chair, or couldn't sit down on the toilet, it was killing me to go up a flight of stairs, then we got to back off a little bit more. That person's not ready. So I think it's just some expertise with whoever's doing it and getting a good understanding of the training background of the client, and then making sure to never start them off too. You're not trying to impress the person by making them sore, basically. I
Yeah,
think.
yeah,
And some people like being sore though too. That's the other thing. You've got to find that in their personality. It's something they enjoy being. They feel like they play better when they have a little soreness. So I've seen all ends of the spectrum on that.
yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about golf specific recovery as it pertains to playing and practicing.
Hmm.
So for the most part, general 18 hole rounds are pretty simple, especially if you do it quite often. But here where I am in the Nashville area, there are also a lot of courses that are extreme topography, lots of hills, really long, and it does get, 90, 95 degrees. After extreme rounds like that, what are some things you can do afterwards to, make sure you're recovered for round two the next day?
Well, number one, you can weigh yourself before the round of golf and then weigh yourself after. If you have a loss of about 2% body weight, you've lost too much fluid.
Okay.
And that's a good barometer to kind of see, is my performance going to start declining at that point? And because it might. So making sure you're staying hydrated. I like mixing, Gatorade with water, with a little bit of like Celtic sea salt. It's the replenishment of the sodium that keeps people from cramping up, that keeps people from getting dehydrated, keeps people thirsty, so they're
Yeah.
continuing to drink. Usually, when a sign of it is if you're really thirsty, it's probably too late. As far as the conditioning aspect of things, it just, you do it enough times, you start to acclimate to it a little bit more. And there's definitely some times where it's very difficult. But I think the more you do it in practice, the better off you're going to be able to sustain, being out on the course. Now it used to be that you could only carry your bag. You couldn't take a push cart or pull cart. So, I think it's a huge advantage to have that option to take a push cart or pull cart with you instead of hoisting that bag on your shoulders. Just making sure you're prepared. You've got food with you out on the course. And then if it is a 36 hole day, that you've got some time in between to kind of eat lunch, recover a little bit, and then get back out there. But as a junior golfer, it can be a grind at times.
Yeah.
And you just got to be careful when it gets to those extreme levels of heat. So if it's going to be a day like that, drink plenty of water and fluids and food the night before. That can make a big difference. Not only just the morning of. You don't want to slam yourself with food for breakfast. You just want to have a good moderate breakfast there, but just make sure you're kind of consistently eating throughout the course of the round, maybe every 2 hours or every hour and a half or something. And obviously making sure you've got something to drink that isn't just water, that's going to replenish more fuel in your body.
Yeah. So, how do you measure where you are in terms of the sodium and electrolytes? How do you know when you need to drink more, drink less, or is that something you can measure on your own at all?
Well, you can kind of tell. So like if you wear, let's just say you go out and you decide, I want to see what kind of sweater I am. It sounds kind of weird, but wear a white shirt, white hat, go out and play 18 holes in the heat and see what color the sweat is. If it's really yellow, then you're a pretty big salt sweater, and that you're going to need to make sure you replenish yourself with some sodium in your drinks. And sometimes Gatorade has sodium in it anyway. You don't want to be pounding Gatorade either. That's why I say mix it, because that can make you sick. Um, but that's really the one of the ways you can kind of measure if you're that person that needs to be a little bit more concerned than someone else. If it's the color of your sweat is turning yellow on
Yeah.
your clothes.
Yeah. And is there any specific type of food on the golf course you recommend that also helps replenish and manage electrolytes and overall energy levels throughout the round?
Yeah, I mean almonds, any kind of nut from the nut family are good. They've got a pretty good balance of fats, carbohydrates. I'll probably get beat up for this by the nutritionists, but I like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. You kind of cut them in halves and through 4 or 5 holes. Obviously with healthy jelly and maybe almond butter, healthy. You don't want stuff that's loaded with sugar because then you can start getting these kind of up and down crashes. You want to keep things kind of level. Um, and then there's so many bars now on the market that are fairly decent. That aren't loaded. I would just look for, when you're looking at a bar to see if it's any good, just looking for added sugars. If you see a lot of added sugars, that's something to stay away from. The natural sugar content is it's just natural sugar with 0 to 1 or 2 grams of added sugars, then that's pretty good.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about it earlier with specific tools to help people recover. What are your thoughts on ice baths, foam rolling, and all those things like that? I know you said it's a little bit personal preference, but are there any of them that are do better for more people than others?
I don't have enough experience to answer that well with regards to clients doing a lot of that stuff. The foam rolling can be helpful because, like I said, anything that like movement, taking walks, stretching, foam rolling, that helps promote blood flow and blood. When you bring blood to the area of tissue that's strained or injured, I say injured. Whenever you work out, you're breaking down muscle tissue, and that's what causes the soreness. And so to heal from it, you need to bring blood into that area. So, lying in bed, wallowing in your soreness is not a good thing to do. So getting out and moving a little bit. As far as the ice baths, they're very good for inflammation. They're not great for muscle growth. So if your goal is hypertrophy, to build some muscle mass, you're too skinny, I would discourage jumping into an ice bath, half an hour after your workout. That's something you want to do maybe 8 to 10, 12 hours later, something like that. There is some research on that. And then, I did say personal preference. Some people are not going to tolerate jumping into cold water with ice, so, and some people might think, oh my God, I feel amazing after. So that's what I meant by personal preference. You're not really going to do any harm unless you stay in for too long. These are short bouts of, maybe 2 to 3 minutes in an ice bath. Or a cryo chamber is even less because it's that much colder. But I generally am going to recommend making sure you're getting sleep, making sure you're eating your meals, you're not skipping meals, and you're eating fairly healthy. You're stretching, you're doing your foam rolling. If you want to do some of the hot, cold stuff, awesome. That'll probably even help even more. So yeah, it's kind of, I would say it's a bunch of things, but really a lot of it comes back down to sleep. It's
Yeah.
boring. It's boring. I know.
I want to talk now about a little bit about mobility because I think, at least on social media, if you look at golf fitness people, a lot of time they're talking about a lot of mobility. And I was interested to see if you thought it's as important as people make it out to be, kind of in the media, or it's less important compared to the other parts of golf fitness.
Again, this is one of those things that it depends. We do evaluations for our clients when we come in, and I saw a kid the other day who's 13 years old, and he has what's called hypermobility. He's got excessive ranges of motion, especially in his low back. That's not something that's great. It helps with range of motion in the golf swing, obviously, but it might predispose him to injury down the road. We don't know. If you're too tight, that might predispose you to injury down the road. I kind of like people to be in this kind of mid-level range when it comes to movement. They should have adequate range of motion in the hip joint, adequate range of motion in the thoracic spine and the cervical spine. Those are areas you want to see some high degrees of movement because that's where we should be generating a lot of the motion from in the golf swing itself. And when those areas are tight, the hips, the mid-back, neck, the low back that's stuck in the middle there ends up taking a brunt of the work. The knees start to get more strained because they start to get more rotary forces in there if the hips don't move well or if the ankles don't move well. So mobility is very important, but it's almost more important that you have the mobility in the right areas. And not everyone needs to stretch. Like I said, this kid that I saw the other day, we're not going to do any stretching, at least on the certain areas of the body. He's got plenty of range of motion already. Now, if we're talking about the senior golfer, the golfer that's a little bit older, we all start to go through this degenerative cascade when we get close to 40. That's where our joints start to break down a little bit. We start to lose joint space. The cartilage can start to wear down, and all of those things can result in, progressive tightness and stiffness.
Yeah.
So I would say a lot of times for the middle-aged golfers, the senior golfers, working on flexibility and mobility becomes much more of a priority than the junior golfer per se. Now, that being said, the junior golfer, the younger golfer, if put through a mobility program, is going to adapt a little bit quicker than that older golfer. So if they need it, then yeah, we're going to be doing it. And they're going to be doing it every day because we want to see increases in that range. Because if we're talking club head speed, which a lot of times this comes down to,
Right.
There's a few different ways to create club head speed, but one of the main ones is time, the ability to create time between the top of the backswing and impact. And to do that, you have to be able to get the hands high away from the golf ball, and you need to be able to kind of unscrew your body down through impact. And if everything's moving either as one unit, you're losing out on this whip-like effect. You're losing out on a little bit of time. Or if the hands are unable to get high in the backswing, or you're unable to make a large turn, that's also going to affect the amount of time to come into impact. So like you look at someone like Bubba Watson's swing, now he's not a guy that's full of muscle mass. He's not super strong, but he is tall and he's got long levers and he can get his hands high and he can really create speed through the amount of time. You look at someone like John Rahm, he doesn't have his hands high. He creates his speed through quickness, good sequencing, but also a lot of force, a lot of strength behind that. So, and then there's guys that kind of fall in the middle realm, but mobility does play a factor in that. So, I would say getting an evaluation to start out, making sure mobility is what you need. And if it is, making it a pretty big part of your program.
Yeah. Is there any way for people who are listening who really, there's not anyone near them who does the assessments or they can't get to them, for them to identify their weak areas on their own?
There's always YouTube. You could always go on and these screens, the TPI screen, it's called. I'm sure there's examples of that assessment on YouTube that you can go and take a look at and kind of look at yourself do it. But it's kind of hard to just sit down yourself and try to figure out if you have enough or what it takes. A lot of times the swing coach, your swing coach will have a good idea if you've got a lot of mobility in your golf swing or if you really struggle with it.
Yeah. So of course the very simple answer of how to get more mobility is stretching. But what is the more elaborate answer to that? If you go in depth, how should you be stretching? How often? What types of stretches? Things like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of different ways to kind of go about it, or a lot of different techniques, I guess I could say you could use. There's static stretching. That's basically where you're holding a stretch for 60 seconds or so. There's more dynamic stretching, where this looks a little bit more like a warm-up, where you're moving through repetitions. There's active isolated stretching, where you're doing kind of a contract, relax effect when you're squeezing and going. I think what works best is a little bit of a combination of going slow, taking time when you're doing it, but also kind of working yourself through the range of motion rather than doing a static stretch where you're just pulling or holding into it. That might be effective. What else works very well is yoga for people that are stiff, because for that very reason, they have to take themselves through that range of motion against the resistance of or restrictions of their body, against gravity. Balance is incorporated. So I think you get a much better effect when you've got more of this kind of, I could say, kind of full body integration of the movement rather than just an isolated area of stretching. That was kind of a strange answer, but there's just so many ways to kind of go about it. And there's different reasons why people are tight. There's people that have legitimate, what they call hypomobility, where the joints, the connective tissue, this is going to be the ligaments, the tendons, are very stiff. They don't like to give much. These are the people that are they don't respond well maybe to stretching.
Yeah.
And then you got the people who may have more bony restrictions, meaning that the bone in the joint is not centered as neutral as it should be, which creates a bias in one direction. So if you try to go against that direction, you're just working against the restriction of the bone.
Yeah.
These are things you can kind of find out through the evaluation. There could be previous injuries, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there could be a lot of reasons why you're tight. I like to
Yeah.
see, to get results, I like to see consistency, number one, making sure you're doing the mobility stuff every day, maybe even twice a day. Not picking a million exercises to do, just focusing on some of the areas you know you're tight. And then doing them for reps and time. That's kind of what I like to do. I'll do like where let's say we're doing an open book exercise where you're lying on your side and you're trying to turn open and get rotation through the chest. Well, it'll be a rotate open, hold for 5 seconds with a few deep breaths, with each breath trying to get deeper into the stretch, and then close it back up. I like that kind of stretching. That seems to work well for our clients. So rather than long time holds, repetitions or shorter holds, but make sure you're working through the rep, like you're actively taking yourself through that range of motion, really working to get where you want to go. Because what's improving is basically the tolerance to the stretch over time. It's not that you're changing the muscle fibers really in any way over time. I mean, you really have to. I'd have to hang you off a rack for an hour to start having these physiological changes in the muscle tissue. And it's more that you're changing your brain and how your brain is tolerating the stretch. And if its guarding systems are up, if it's saying, I don't like this, over time, you do it enough times, it's going to start allowing you more range of motion. And then that's what improves. So it's actually more neurological than physiological.
Yeah. So when should people be stretching? After, before workouts, after, before golf?
People should start stretching, or when they should be. They definitely should be doing a warm up of some kind that is dynamic in nature before they play. But I usually like, if they're going to do their corrective exercises, mobility work, make sure it's after the workout, because if you're just stretching for a long time, sometimes you need to add that like little bit of a heart rate element, a little bit of movement element if you're going to go play. That'll better prepare you than just lying on the ground and doing stretches. I like it post round.
Yeah. Do you have any recommendations for building that active warm up for a round?
I like making sure people focus on the ankles, something for the ankles, something for the hips, something for that thoracic spine. And I like to get all of those areas through 3 dimensions of movement, meaning something that is going forward and back in a stretch, something that's going side to side, and then something that's rotating, or at least asking those joints in those areas, the hips, the mid-back, the ankles, to move through those 3 dimensions for each movement you do, and to make them a little bit more rep-oriented than time-oriented.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about injury prevention and how that plays into golf. So first off, what are the top injuries you see with golfers? What do you see most frequently?
I would say it's pretty much low back. We see a lot of low back, a lot of wrist. I would say those 2 are the primary issues. Sometimes the lead shoulder.
Okay.
But
And what are the primary deficits you see that lead to those types of injuries?
There are some areas you'd like to see good mobility in, so the opportunity for those injuries doesn't happen, but ultimately you can't really control that. People might just get hurt. You know what I mean? It just sometimes happens to people, even if they have great ranges of motion or great stability. Usually the tissue breaks down when the load exceeds its ability to tolerate it. Does that make sense?
It does.
And so
yeah.
if it's usually a management issue where they're just doing too much of something, either hitting too many balls, working out way too much with hitting too many balls, doing the wrong stuff, maybe. That's where you see the breakdown aspect of it. But if someone is, like I said before, if someone's really lacking hip mobility, then they do, or hip internal rotation to be specific, then there is an opportunity, maybe more so, to have a back issue in the future.
Yeah. So do you have it depends on the person and their preferences, but do you have a recommendation for kind of a maximum balls per day that should be hit by somebody practicing a lot?
Yeah, that again, everyone's different on this,
Right, of
and
course.
what they can tolerate. And for me to tell them just to not practice and hit 200 balls, is sometimes difficult, because I know they're just going to do it.
Well, yeah.
I like to see a combination. Like, the best practice day to me is the day where day where you're on the range, you're working on a few things.
Hmm.
It's maybe a bit of blocked practice where you're actually just trying to groove a pattern. That
Hmm.
might be 50 to 100 balls. And then you're hitting the next 20 shots or 15 shots where you're putting yourself in what's called a variable practice state, where you're creating different situations. This is what you're trying to take to the course or you want carryover for. So you might say, I'm going to hit a 6-iron cut into the flag stick. And then you hit it, you go back to your bag, take a pitching wedge out, go through your pre-shot routine. I'm going to hit a 115-yard knockdown pitching wedge here, and then hit that.
Yeah.
So the ability to actually hit 15 balls in 15 minutes is really hard.
Right.
I challenge people to do that, but that's what the research says and the data says carries over best.
Yeah. So, of course, it depends on someone's schedule and what's possible. But if it is possible, do you recommend people building in rest days into their practice and playing? And if so, how often?
Um, I do. So if it's throughout the week, I'd like to see, I'd love to see like 2 rest days throughout the course of a week if it's a pro golfer that I'm working with. Um, but I think what's reasonable is one rest day is on average what they're doing. Some days are a little harder than others if they're working out 2 days a week. And they're obviously playing, practicing those days that they're also working out. And then the other days they're playing and practicing. Getting back to what I meant to say earlier, a perfect session would be block practice with some variable practice, some short game
Hmm.
work, and then out on the course. So it's a combination of everything. Maybe they finish up out on the course playing 9 holes or 18 holes or something. So I'd rather see more of their attention devoted to the actual game of playing rather than just hitting all the time. And, because when you're on the course, you're not hitting as many balls, obviously.
Right. And when it comes to injuries, are there any specific things golfers should be looking out for or paying attention to in their body to kind of see if it's signaling they're getting closer to an injury or an injury might have happened?
Yeah, I wouldn't, I think golfers by who they are by nature, by and large, tend to feel pretty good about how their body's feeling. So if any red lights go off, they're pretty quick to tell me if something's bothering them. Um, you never want to play through pain. You never want to train through pain. So if that is, I should say never. Sometimes you have to. Uh,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like sometimes you just have, you got a tournament coming up, that sort of thing, and it's the type of injury that maybe you're not going to do a lot more damage to. But I see if someone's in pain, I like to make sure they get checked out by a good health practitioner that I'll send them to, and make sure it's nothing too serious. They might just need time off, and doing a few exercises to get them back on track, or maybe they need a little bit of soft tissue work from a hands-on therapist that can do some dry needling or do some massage, joint mobilizations, stuff like that. So it's kind of a network of team. You don't want to. It's not just me. Um, in fact, that's kind of where I will defer when there is an injury.
Right. And I want to talk a little bit about TPI, which, coordinates with the mobility and the injury prevention side of things. What are some things that you've learned and TPI allows you to do that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do?
Well, level one is was huge for me, and I think anyone else who's gone through it, because it's that's where they really establish the connection between the swing and the body, and then they run through the full assessment that you would take someone through to identify that connection. Getting back to what I said earlier, if you talk to the guys at TPI and you're looking at a client's golf swing and you see a high degree of early extension where they're really thrusting their hips forward towards the ball, they're going to go back and say, how was his deep squat? What it look like? Because if it was not great, he was falling forward, he couldn't get very low, then the connection there is pretty obvious to them. They see a high degree of percentages of people who fail that test also struggle with keeping their posture in their golf swing. So that's what they've done really well, is to really bring that connection together. And golf is unique in that versus other sports is that it's stationary. You know what I mean? Like you're setting up to hit a ball and then you're creating this really fast dynamic movement, and that's it. You're not reacting to something else. There's nothing in the external environment that's causing you to have to shift or move or reach or lunge. So it's easy to kind of look at something, slow it down like a golf swing, and say, where might this person be restricted and what could be causing that. So they did
Yeah.
a great job with that. Yeah.
So, what makes a level 3 different from a level 2? Because if you look, I'm sure it's different in South Florida and California, but if you look at Tennessee, there's one person in the entire state that has a level 3. And I was interested to see or to ask what the differences were.
They get more into power training, Olympic lifting.
Okay.
I can't, it was so long ago, I can't totally remember what else they're getting into, but they're just expanding upon the training component of things. Less on the
Okay.
evaluation, more on the training, more into potentially club fitting, stuff like that. I'd say if you see a TPI 3, the person's invested in training golfers. That's how I look at it. Like, this
Yeah.
is a big part of their clientele. This is going to be a big part of their understanding.
Yeah. And I know they have their sub specializations, I guess you could
Yep.
call them. Do you have any of those, or do you recommend people look for those when they're looking for a trainer or someone to help them
I
with
don't
an
think it's
injury?
necessary, but I have the power training certification. I thought it was very good. Really, a lot of kind of gold information out there on how to create speed. And a lot of this stuff is relatively new-ish, being the emphasis on speed now and how people are creating
Yeah.
speed, especially
Yeah.
through force, looking and identifying it through force plates. So I think the power track was very helpful for me in my programming with people. And then, having a really good idea of like, how can we get this guy more speed if we need to.
Right. So I want to wrap it up with a few questions I ask
Mm-hmm.
everybody who comes on the podcast. So my first question is, what are some of your favorite books to recommend?
Well, for my business, my favorite book that helped me get started and get things on the right is a book called Story Brand by Donald Miller. So for someone like yourself or people that are looking to get into business, you don't even have to have your own business. I think it's a remarkable book um, that has helped me a lot from the business standpoint. If you're a trainer, Shirley Sarman's book, Movement Impairment Syndromes, it's a little bit more advanced, I'd say, than your regular like fitness training book. It covers a little bit more of the corrective exercise, physical therapy side of things, but it really gives you a really good idea of how to assess movement in and of itself and diagnose these injuries. Not that I'm doing any diagnosing, but at least having a good understanding of what exercises might be applicable to help this person if they do have an injury or if they're just not moving well. They're having some dysfunction in how they move.
Yeah.
That's a great book. Um, Advances in Functional Training by Mike Boyle. He is kind of the god of strength and conditioning, I think, when it comes to programming and learning how to program correctly for athletes.
Hmm.
Um, so if any trainers are out here listening to it, that's kind of like a must. You got to get that book because it creates some things that are complicated and puts them into simple text that you can
Yeah.
understand. And he applies things in a simple manner that you can
Yeah.
apply immediately.
Yeah. And then if you could give only one tip to junior golfers or collegiate golfers looking to play at the next level, what would that tip be?
I would say kind of what we talked about a little bit earlier. Don't think more is always better, like doing more and more and more. Making sure you're doing the right things, you're seeing the right coaches, you're getting the right training. I don't mind going through the whole, team effect even as a junior. I think that's a great idea. But people have to know when to pump the brakes a little bit. And I do like the idea of playing multiple sports until you're about 13 or 14, even maybe a freshman in high school is when you can start to specialize because, I hate seeing kids burn out. I hate seeing families that are completely and utterly devoted to this person's golf game and that's it, nothing else. I like to see some variety and just see them get better on their own accord because they love playing. And I don't like to see them get burned out.
Yeah. So thank you for joining me again today. I feel like we've had
Yeah.
a great discussion. Where can people find out more about you and on social media? And do you do virtual training at all?
We have an app that we use. So any kind of remote training we usually set it up through the app. But they can find me at www.lifetimeperformancepbg.com. Or if they want to get a good idea of how we train, my Instagram, Kenny Mac _LP. That's a good place to see kind of what we do and how we do it. It's pretty much solely devoted to the business and training.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Perfect Par podcast. You can find out more about my guest in this episode and where you can find them in the episode description. You can also find out more about me and shorter podcast clips on my Instagram at carter.stroup or my Twitter at Carter Stroup.